When Father Dominic arrived at the monastery of San Miguel, the abbot told him there were only 2 rules he needed to follow: never miss morning prayer and never open the door at the end of the eastern corridor. "What's behind it?" Dominic asked. The abbot's face went very still. "The 3 Marys," he said quietly, "and you don't want to meet them." Dominic had been a priest for 12 years, assigned to remote parishes, crumbling chapels, places where faith had worn thin. San Miguel was supposed to be his last stop before retirement. A quiet monastery in the mountains of southern Spain, far from anything resembling civilization. The building itself was ancient, stone walls thick enough to swallow sound, hallways that twisted back on themselves like a maze. 12 monks lived there, all of them old, all of them silent. They prayed 7 times a day, ate in silence, and never looked him in the eye. On his 3rd night, Dominic heard singing. It woke him just after midnight, a sound so faint he thought at first it was the wind. 3 voices, female, harmonizing in Latin. The melody was beautiful, haunting. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He sat up in his narrow bed, listening. The singing grew louder, clearer. It was coming from the eastern corridor. He pulled on his robe and stepped into the hall. The monastery was dark except for a few candles burning in wall sconces. The singing echoed off the stone, filling the air with a strange, heavy sweetness. Dominic followed the sound. The corridor stretched longer than he remembered, the shadows deeper. At the very end, barely visible in the flickering candlelight, was a door. Heavy wood, iron hinges, 3 names carved into the surface: Maria Magdalena, Maria Salome, Maria Jacobi. The 3 Marys. The singing was coming from behind it. Dominic's hand reached for the handle. "I wouldn't." He spun around. Brother Raphael stood behind him, old and bent, his face carved with lines like dried riverbeds. "You heard them," Raphael said. It wasn't a question. "Who are they?" Dominic whispered. "The 3 Marys of Hell," Raphael said, "and they've been waiting a very long time." The next morning, Dominic asked the abbot for the full story. The old man sighed, folded his hands, and spoke in a voice that sounded like gravel scraping stone. In 1511, 3 women were brought to this monastery, all of them named Maria, all of them accused of witchcraft. The church needed a place to hold them before trial. San Miguel was remote, isolated, perfect. They were kept in a cell at the end of the eastern corridor. They prayed constantly, sang hymns, begged for mercy. The monks who guarded them said the women never slept, never stopped singing. One night, the prior at the time decided to test them. He believed if they were truly innocent, God would protect them. So he locked them in the cell and set it on fire. Dominic's stomach turned. He burned them alive? The prior called it purification. The abbot said quietly. He thought the flames would prove their innocence or their guilt. They burned for hours. The entire monastery could hear them screaming. But when the fire finally died and they opened the door, the women were still alive, kneeling in the ash, unburned, singing. The abbot's hands trembled. The prior declared them demons, said they'd made a pact with the devil to survive. So he had them chained to the walls and sealed the door. They were left to starve. For weeks the monks heard them, singing, praying, begging. And then one night, the singing changed. Changed how? It became a hymn, the abbot said, but not to God, to something else, something older. The prior went to the door and heard them chanting in a language no one recognized. When he opened it, He found all 3 women dead, their bodies twisted, their mouths frozen open, and carved into the stone above them in letters that still haven't faded. He paused. Tre Mariae Inferni, the 3 Marys of Hell. But I heard them last night, Dominic said. They were singing. The abbot met his eyes. They never stopped. Dominic should have left. He should have packed his things and requested a transfer. But something kept him there. Curiosity, pride, a belief that whatever haunted San Miguel could be explained, could be reasoned with, could be blessed away. He was wrong. The singing came every night, always after midnight, always from behind the door. Sometimes it was Latin hymns. Sometimes it was wordless melodies that made his teeth ache. And every night, Dominic felt the pull, the urge to walk down that corridor, to open the door, to see what was inside. The other monks avoided him now. They whispered when he passed, crossed themselves. Brother Raphael told him plainly, "You're listening too closely. That's how they—" "Get in where?" Dominic asked. "Your head," Raphael said. "Your heart. They sing, and you think it's beautiful. You think it's holy. And by the time you realize what it really is, you're already theirs." On the 7th night, Dominic woke to find himself standing in front of the door. He had no memory of walking there. One moment, he was asleep in his bed. The next, he was in the eastern corridor, barefoot, his hand on the iron handle. The singing was so loud now, it felt like it was coming from inside his skull. 3 voices braided together, rising and falling, pulling him forward. He turned the handle. The door opened. The room beyond was small. Stone walls, no windows. 3 iron chains hung from the ceiling, their ends bolted to the floor. The air smelled like smoke and rot, and something sweet he couldn't name. And standing in the center of the room, facing him, were 3 women. They wore tattered robes, the color of ash. Their hair was long and black, hanging over their faces. Their hands were folded in prayer. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. But they were singing. The same hymn. The same 3-part harmony. And as Dominic stared, one of them slowly lifted her head. Her face was burned, the skin blackened and cracked, the eyes white and milky. But her mouth moved, and her voice was beautiful. "Hello, Father," she said. The other 2 lifted their heads. Identical faces, identical burns, identical smiles. "We've been waiting," the second one said. "Praying," the third one added. "For someone who listens." Dominic tried to speak, but his throat was closed. The women stepped forward in perfect unison, their feet making no sound on the stone. "We were innocent," the first one said. "We begged for mercy," the second one said. "And they burned us anyway," the third one finished, their voices layered, overlapping, becoming one. "So we prayed, and something answered, not God, something older, something that lives in the spaces between prayers. And it gave us a gift." "What gift?" Dominic managed to whisper. The 3 Marys smiled. "We can't die," they said together. "We can't leave, but we can sing. And when someone listens long enough, when someone opens the door," they stepped closer. "We can share." Dominic felt something cold slide into his chest. Not physical, deeper, like fingers reaching through his ribs and wrapping around his heart. The women's mouths opened wider, and the singing poured out, not beautiful anymore, but vast and terrible, a sound that folded in on itself and pulled him down into something black and endless. He tried to scream, but the sound that came out of his mouth wasn't his. It was theirs. 3 voices, braided, harmonizing. The last thing he remembered was the door closing behind him. The next morning, the monks found Father Dominic kneeling in the chapel, hands folded in prayer, eyes open and unblinking. He was singing softly, a hymn in Latin, beautiful, flawless. When the abbot asked him if he was all right, Dominic smiled. "I'm wonderful," he said. "I've been blessed." But his voice wasn't quite his own. It had layers now, textures, like 3 voices speaking at once, just slightly out of sync. The abbot ordered him to leave. Dominic refused. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. He spent every night in the chapel, kneeling before the altar, singing. The other monks avoided him. Some claimed they saw shadows standing behind him when he prayed. 3 shadows, female, their hands on his shoulders. 6 months later, Father Dominic died in his sleep. They found him in his bed, hands still folded in prayer, a faint smile on his face, and carved into the wall above his headboard, in letters that looked burned into the stone, Quatuor Mariae Inferni, 4 Marys of Hell. The monks sealed his room. They never spoke of him again. But on some nights, when the wind is right and the moon is dark, visitors to San Miguel swear they can hear singing. 4 voices now, harmonizing, rising from somewhere deep within the monastery's stone bones. Beautiful, holy, wrong. And if you ever find yourself in the mountains of southern Spain, and you see the old monastery of San Miguel standing alone against the sky, and you hear singing drifting through its broken windows, don't go inside. Don't follow the sound. Don't think it's beautiful, because the 3 Marys of Hell are still waiting, still singing, still praying for someone who listens. And now, they're not alone. There are 4 of them, maybe 5, maybe more. The monastery keeps count. The stone remembers, and the door at the end of the eastern corridor is always unlocked.